In this video, we will discuss what access to the general curriculum really means for students with disabilities. The term access can be confusing because it has several meanings. Many people believe that students with disabilities have access to the curriculum if they are provided with a textbook or are given access to the general classroom environment. Unfortunately, it is not quite that simple. People with certain types of disabilities have to use specialized tools in order to access and convey information. These specialized tools are called assistive technology. Some examples of assistive technology would be text-to-speech or screen reading software, large print software, alternative keyboards and mice, communication devices, etc. There are many types and varieties of assistive technology tools, but assistive technology by itself cannot guarantee access to the curriculum. In order for assistive technologies to work as they are designed to work, they need to interface with content that has been designed to meet accessibility standards. Think of it as a two-part equation. Assistive technology plus accessible instructional materials, or AIM, equals equally effective access to the general curriculum for students with disabilities. If one part of the equation isn't there, then access won't be possible. When you think about access to electronic content, you need to consider physical, sensory, and cognitive access to both the content and to the hardware that renders that content. For example, a standard computer will have a screen, a keyboard, and mouse, but not everyone is able to use all of those components. A person with a physical and/or visual disability may not be able to use a mouse and may have to access content by only using a keyboard. The same can be said for touch technologies. Not everyone is able to use touch gestures. Alternative means of access need to be available to people who have different needs. There are 13 categories of disabilities defined by law, but they can be manifested in an endless array of combinations. For this reason, it is important to avoid making assumptions about how users will access content. Accessibility for different needs must be considered and planned for at the very beginning of the development process. The World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, has developed Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also referred to as WCAG. The WCAG 2.0 guidelines are built upon the premise that content must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable means that information and user interface components must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive. This would include text alternatives, captions, alternative means of presentation, and making it easier for users to see and hear content. Operable means that the user interface components and navigation must be operable by all users. This would include making all functions available from a keyboard, giving users adequate time to read content, avoiding flashing content that might cause seizures, and helping users navigate and find content. Understandable means that information and the operation of the user interface must be understandable to all users. This would mean that text is readable, content operates in a predictable manner, and users have support to avoid and correct mistakes. Robust means that content can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. In other words, content is interoperable with other technologies. The WCAG guidelines are organized into 3 levels: Level A, Level 2A, and Level 3A. If content doesn't meet Level A requirements, it will be impossible for people with certain types of disabilities to access it. If content doesn't meet Level 2A requirements, it will be very difficult for people with certain types of disabilities to access it. For this reason, the federal government is targeting compliance with WCAG 2.0 Level 2A as their standard for Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. Sometimes content developers will wrongly assume that they will have to sacrifice rigor, creativity, or student engagement in order to make content accessible to students with disabilities. This is simply not true. The content authoring tools that are available to developers make it possible for accessibility, rigor, creativity, and student engagement to live in harmony with each other. There are 2 primary challenges that K-12 schools have related to integrating accessible instructional materials. First, school personnel have to understand what access really means for students with disabilities from both an instructional perspective and a policy perspective. Many school systems do not realize that they can be sued for purchasing inaccessible content. Under current legislation, vendors cannot be sued for producing inaccessible content, but schools can be sued for buying it. The second challenge schools face with accessibility is knowing how to ask for accessible products in procurement and how to verify the accessibility claims that are made by vendors. There are some procurement resources available through Knowbility that schools may find helpful. One of these procurement resources is a VPAT validation tool. A VPAT is a voluntary product accessibility template that many vendors have available on their websites. The VPAT validation questions will provide you with questions to ask the vendors to determine whether or not the claims they have made on their VPATs are in fact valid. Another procurement resource that is available through Knowbility is a document entitled Accessibility Standards in Procurement. This document outlines all of the WCAG 2.0 Level 2A requirements into a 5-point rubric. Vendors would be expected to complete the rubric as part of an RFP document and specify how their product scores on each WCAG standard. The bottom of this document contains some legal language that has been vetted by the Texas Health and Human Services Department. Essentially, the language holds vendors accountable for the claims they make about the accessibility of their product. Both of these resources can be accessed on Knowbility's wiki at http://wiki.knowbility.org/procurement-resources. At this point, I would like to demonstrate what happens when assistive technology encounters content that has not been designed to meet accessibility standards. The assistive technology, or AT, that I will be using for this demonstration is called Read and Write Gold. Read and Write Gold is a toolbar that has a variety of supports for people with disabilities. In addition to this AT, the first set of content we will look at is inside a product called SchoolNet. This is a product that districts often use to create custom-made curriculum materials or to develop benchmark tests. I have opened a reading benchmark test in SchoolNet. You are seeing the test in the developer's view. This is the view the teacher or curriculum specialist would use to create content. I am going to select some of the text to demonstrate that text can be selected in the developer's view and read with the text-to-speech tool on the Read and Write Gold toolbar. When I select some of the text with the mouse, it highlights in blue. This is an indication that my assistive technology will be able to access the text. When I activate the text-to-speech feature, you will see that it will read back what I have highlighted.
A bird came down the walk he did not know I saw.
As long as I can see and am able to use a mouse, I can select text and read it with the text-to-speech feature on the Read and Write Gold toolbar. Now we are going to preview the online test to see what the students would actually encounter when trying to take this test. The test is going to be pulled up in a browser window. The first thing you will notice is that the color contrast between the yellow text and the white background is very low. The contrast on the Start button is also not very good. There are people with visual disabilities who would find the text on this screen very difficult, if not impossible, to see. Second, I am going to demonstrate what would happen if I were a student with a visual impairment or a physical impairment that prohibited me from using a mouse. You will notice that there is a button in the middle of the screen that says Start Test Now. I am going to try to access that button without my mouse. To do this, I will press my Tab key and my up and down arrow keys. As I press these keys, try to see where my keystrokes are taking me on the screen. You will notice that there is no way to tell where the computer's focus is because there is no visual indicator. The only activity you see as I tab is on the Read and Write Gold toolbar. There is nothing going on in the content I am trying to access, and I am unable to get to the Start button with my keyboard. Also, for content to be accessible, there needs to be a visual focus indicator for people who can see but have to use the keyboard to navigate. I'm going to go ahead and start the test with my mouse, and we will see what the test would look like for a student. I'm going to try to select the first verse of the poem with my mouse, but you will notice that the text is no longer highlighting in blue. It is highlighting in yellow. When this test went from the developer view to the student view, a conversion was made to the text that made it inaccessible to any assistive technology. This was done on purpose to keep students from being able to read the text with any kind of text reader due to current testing policies. Even so, many testing policies currently allow the questions and answers to be read for students with qualifying disabilities. So, if I want to use my assistive technology to read what I am allowed to have read to me, I am going to find that there are additional barriers that will prohibit effective access for students with certain types of disabilities. Since I am at the top of this page, I'm going to activate the text-to-speech feature on the Read and Write Gold toolbar to see if it will read the page to me in a logical, understandable manner. When I do that, this is what you're going to hear.
McSorley, Janet. English reading MOII 12:13. Hello Janet McSorley. Please click on the Start Test Now button to begin. English reading MOII 12:13 test. Good luck. Read and review question 1. Test response summary. Now's your chance to go over and double check your answers before the test is graded. Warning, you have questions. Warning, some answers may not have saved properly. Please click here to copy your answers to the clipboard.
I think you get the picture. The test is not designed to allow my assistive technology to read content from the top of the page should I feel the need to just listen to what is on the screen before starting. At least it told us good luck, because if we are students with disabilities, we are going to need all the luck we can get to take this test independently and actually demonstrate what we know instead of demonstrating our disabilities. Again, if I try to tab through this test to get to any of the content, I am not able to access anything without a mouse. Remember, many testing policies allow students with certain types of disabilities to have test questions and responses read to them. But on this screen, if I move my mouse to question number 1 and try to select it, I can't. The reason I can't select this question is that it is now a picture. It is no longer actual text. I know this because my mouse pointer changes to a circle with a line through it to indicate I am out of luck if I want to select this text. When I try to select all of the answer choices with my mouse, I have a very difficult time controlling the selection. A person with a physical or visual disability who cannot use a mouse, or someone with limited mouse control, would not be able to complete this task independently. In the process of trying to select the answer choices so that I can read them, I accidentally chose an answer. You can see how frustrating this experience would be for a person with a disability who needs to use assistive technology to interact with content. So let's move to the second example of inaccessible content. A student on our AT caseload was asked to complete a reading assignment using this Scholastic product. Obviously, when you pull this product up in a browser window, nobody can see the actual content because it is a reduced graphic image. Even so, let's just explore the screen a little bit to see what a student without a disability would do to access this. There are controls along the bottom that allow students to enlarge the image so that they can read the text. You can only access these controls with a mouse. If I try to tab or arrow to the controls, nothing happens and I can't get to the controls or the content by the keyboard. This is an entirely visual interface that requires vision, the ability to read printed text without assistance, and the ability to use a mouse. If I try to select text so that my text-to-speech tool can read to me, I am not able to do so. The mouse simply grabs the image and moves it around the screen. If I try to read the entire screen with my text-to-speech tool,
1.
it does not read the content to me. The only way I can read this text at all is to use the screenshot reader in my Read and Write Gold toolbar. The screenshot reader will copy what I select and convert it from a picture into text. It will then place the text into Microsoft Word, and then I will be able to use my text-to-speech tool in Read and Write Gold to read the converted text. I'm going to select a section of text on the bottom. I have to have very good control when using a mouse, or I won't select all of the text I am needing to have converted. Also, if I don't have good mouse control, I might accidentally select some of the text in the sidebar. Once I have selected the text, the screenshot reader puts the text into Microsoft Word, but you will notice that it is just floating in the middle of a page. It does not put it at the top left of the page, so the student would have to scroll to look for the text. So you can see that students with certain types of disabilities are going to have to expend a lot more physical and cognitive energy just to access the content that students without disabilities can access easily. Students with certain types of disabilities would not be able to access this content at all. Obviously, this is not an example of equally effective access, and there is really no justification for presenting content in this manner. This is an avoidable, man-made barrier to access for students with disabilities. This concludes the demonstration of what happens when AT meets inaccessible content. Even though we only looked at 2 curriculum products, unfortunately, it is more the rule than the exception for K-12 content providers to design learning materials without effectively considering the access needs of students with disabilities. Dr. Dave Eddyburn has made the observation that inclusion has given students with disabilities access to educational environments, but not necessarily access to the general curriculum, and he is right. As virtual education expands and more materials are delivered in digital formats, we are seeing how man-made barriers to content are keeping students with disabilities from having equal access to learning opportunities. So why is this happening? There are 2 primary influences that drive everything we do in education: money and accountability. The tale as old as time is that schools always face budget restrictions, and yet, according to the U.S. Education Technology Industry Market Pre-K-12 report, educational software and digital content constitutes a $7.6 billion industry. Since educational software and digital content can provide increased rigor, creativity, and student engagement, it would be logical to assume that this content would help schools alleviate the achievement gap that has historically existed between students with and without disabilities. Unfortunately, that is not the case. School districts nationwide complain that they cannot achieve the annual yearly progress requirements of the No Child Left Behind Act because of the substandard test scores of students with disabilities. In 2005-2006, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Educational Laboratory compared the relationship between adequate yearly progress, or AYP scores, of the states in their region with the performance of students with disabilities who are served under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Because states can define how they measure AYP, it is difficult to compare state outcomes. Also, states may or may not report the progress of students with disabilities as a subgroup. Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania all had percentages of schools that reported outcomes for this subgroup, and they also had similar percentages of students with disabilities served in each state during the 2005-2006 school year. 37% of the reporting schools in Delaware, 43% in Maryland, 70% in New Jersey, and 57% in Pennsylvania did not meet AYP for the special education subgroup. But the outcomes for the special education subgroup are only one of the reasons that schools as a whole may fail to meet AYP. In this table, you will see that 28% of the reporting schools in Delaware, 12% in Maryland, 29% in New Jersey, and 38% in Pennsylvania failed to meet AYP solely based on the performance of their students with disabilities. There is really no argument that the performance of students with disabilities is going to affect a school's ability to meet AYP as long as AYP calculations hold schools accountable for this population. So let's get back to the elephant in the room. If schools are going to spend $7.6 billion a year on educational software and digital content, does it really make sense to spend it on content that will categorically deny access to students that so many schools are struggling to serve? Let's think about this logically for a minute. Purchasing inaccessible content just doesn't make sense. Schools don't have an unlimited amount of money. The more we divide the pie, the less each group gets. Ideally, if we had to divide the pie, it would be divided equally, but in reality, that never happens. Instead, as we all scramble to get a piece of the pie, we often don't stop to think about the effects of dividing it in the first place. When we're talking about the pie that buys instructional materials, dividing that pie between groups of students simply results in a duplication of effort, a dilution of quality across the board, and a waste of money. When we buy content that is not accessible, we spend additional money on personnel and materials to modify or replicate that content, and no matter what we do, we cannot make the modified or replicated content equitable to the original content. So what's the solution? The bottom line is that schools have to ask for accessible learning materials through procurement. Accessible learning materials are more flexible and can meet the needs of a wider range of students than inaccessible materials. They are more effective and are a much better return on investment. As schools, we have to stop dividing the instructional materials pie and diluting our resources. We need to raise the bar and expect content providers to give us materials that are rigorous, engaging, creative, and accessible. K-12 vendors and publishers often claim that schools are not asking for accessible materials. There's a saying that you don't get what you deserve, you get what you ask for. So if schools will specify that they will only buy content that meets accessibility standards, then the market will respond. So how can we make this happen? First, we have to start by informing people within our respective school districts. We literally have to introduce the left hand to the right hand and make sure they have the same information. There are key people in every district who make policy and purchasing decisions. Special education, response to intervention, and bilingual education departments should be able to easily collaborate on the issue of accessible materials because these materials will improve outcomes for their students. The legal department in a school system would be very interested in the fact that schools can be sued for purchasing inaccessible content. The purchasing department would be interested in solutions for effectively addressing accessibility through the purchasing process. They might be interested in reviewing some of the procurement resources we discussed earlier in this presentation that are available on the Knowbility Wiki. Curriculum and educational technology departments would benefit from knowing that any materials they purchase or create themselves need to be accessible if they want to see higher gains in learning across the board. Often, schools create their own content without any understanding of the barriers they are creating for students with learning differences. Or they purchase content without evaluating whether or not that content can be represented in multiple ways, or whether students have multiple means of demonstrating their knowledge, or whether the content provides different paths for engaging learners. Unfortunately, it is difficult to influence decision makers in a school system when you have limited access to them. Your best bet is to be prepared so that you can take advantage of even the smallest window of time. Also, be tenacious and keep your message succinct. With respect to accessibility, it's pretty simple. Civil rights require that students with disabilities have equally effective access to the general curriculum. Equal access to content can positively impact AYP ratings, and accessible content is more flexible and more cost-effective. Knowbility has a one-page document that you might find helpful as you try to raise awareness among the various departments in your school district. It is called Access is a Civil Right, and it is available on the Knowbility Wiki under Procurement Resources. If you have any questions, please contact Jan McSorley at mcsorleyjan@gmail.com. That's M-C-S as in Sam, O-R-L-E-Y-J-A-N @gmail.com. You can also get assistance with any accessibility needs you may have by contacting Sharon Rush at Knowbility Inc. Sharon's email address is srush@knowbility.org. That's S-R-U-S-H at KNOWBILITY.org. Thanks for watching.